Hey, Peter.
Hey.
Whatever I say today,
Yes.
I want you to say the opposite.
No.
Good.
Bad.
Welcome to the podcast.
Get out of my podcast.
Hi, Madam Manis.
I'm Peter Martin.
I'm still trying to throw you, man. This is the
I'm
You'll
Red
Hear
Up Knit Ram.
This is the You'll Hear It podcast.
Music advice coming at you.
Coming at you today. It's opposite day around here, Peter.
That's right.
Remember that in elementary school?
Of course.
Day. Everything's opposite day.
That's right.
And
Hey, teacher, you're an idiot. That's what I tried that one year. It didn't go over.
work. No. What you would do is
I took it too literal.
You'd be like, "I like you,"
Right.
and then it'd be like, "Oh, what?" And you're like, "It's opposite day."
Right.
You're like, "Oh, you burned me."
Yeah. Burn. Hey, that was a good, witty banter intro. We're back on our game. Didn't you think? No, you don't think. You got the look.
Is that opposite day though? Are you doing opposite day?
We're not doing opposite day yet because we haven't introduced it.
I
yet.
thought you were doing the
I thought that was
playground thing here of opposite
I thought
day.
that was a good intro.
Agreed. Yeah.
It's been months, to be frank, since we've had a good one.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's good to be back in the saddle with you.
Got it back.
Yeah. So good. What's happening?
Well, today we're talking about, we're actually going to introduce a concept that, man, there's so many in this book. So been reading, and actually all of Open Studio, we've started a book club here at Open
Yes.
Studio. All of the employees.
It's called the Open Studio Book Club.
Yeah, it's
Imaginatively titled.
we're a very creative bunch.
This week this day on opposite day, it's called the Not Open Studio Book Club.
But we've been reading Rick Rubin's new book.
It's called the Open Studio Book Burning Club today.
We're not going to burn any books. We've been reading Rick Rubin's new book, The Creative Act, A Way of Being. Rick Rubin, of course, legendary record producer.
Yes.
From everybody.
Creative force.
40, 50 years or whatever. Incredible creative dude, and not a musician, not an engineer, not a producer, really. He is a producer, but nothing technical. Really just kind of a guru at getting the best out of really great artists.
Yes.
And his book.
Big picture guy.
Yeah, big picture guy. Definitely like a mindfulness guy. Definitely a balance.
OG mindfulness
guy. For sure. A balance kind of guy. Definitely someone who I think is a great leader in doing some really important things that leaders are usually really good at, which is getting the best out of people, right?
Yeah.
Like having people discover parts about themselves.
Get the right people in the room.
Yeah.
Get the best work out of them.
Yeah.
Longtime vegan as well.
Yeah,
OG vegan.
But it's an amazing book. We recommend it to anybody. Any creative person, I think you would get a lot out of it. I mean, especially if you're into sort of the mindfulness part of things, or even, whatever it is that you're into as far as productivity or your practice game, I think you would find some very helpful things on this. We're going to touch on just a very small chapter.
But a great part of it. And before we get into that particular one, I'd just say the title of the book is The Creative Act. We highly recommend it. I think not just don't be put off or don't get put into a box as far as like this is about doing artistic things only. This is really, I think, applicable to all aspects.
Yeah.
Many aspects of our lives and our endeavors, be it in business, be it in the arts, all these things. It's like how do you get a creative mindset for everything?
Life is a creative act.
Exactly.
Living is a creative
how
act.
you're going to walk down the street, how you're going to do anything.
You're going to dress in the morning.
It's so all inclusive in terms of its creativity.
100%. And actually, that's the first point he makes in the book, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But we're talking about here, this is a chapter that's a page and a half long, but it's something I read this morning, and I thought it would just be perfect to bring into this because it as soon as I read it, I realized like, oh, this is like a technique that I already do, that I've, how like
we call that confirmation bias.
Well, yeah, for sure. But it's something that I do that I've never named or really pulled out. I think I've actually talked about it a couple of times on the podcast about sort of when you're stuck improvising, but it's also something that you can use when you're sort of in a rut with anything you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's to consider the opposite of what you're doing. So we can put this in several different contexts. I put it in the context before here, Peter, of when you're improvising, sometimes we all do this, where your hands start playing just what they already know. Like you start playing things that are pretty prescriptive from your end. There's nothing really in the moment or creative about what you're doing. You're kind of playing lick A into insert lick A.
Maybe a little too comfortable. Comfort zone, but not a positive comfort zone.
And I don't mean like you're just using language in an interesting way. You're using language, but it's not very inspired. It's not very interesting.
It's like if you're having a conversation and someone said, you're just using words. You're just talking right now,
Yeah,
aren't you?
you're not
telling
saying
a
anything.
story.
Exactly. You're not really engaged. That's probably the biggest mark of this is actually not what you're playing, but it's kind of how you're feeling.
Right.
Which is not very engaged, not very in the moment, not very connected to what's happening. Whenever I feel that way, the first thing I usually do is tell myself, do the opposite. Whatever's happening here. So if I'm just like, we're listening to my favorite things from McCoy,
Yeah.
so I got that. Now that all sounds fine, but I'm not super engaged with what's going on. I'm kind of doing things. I'm like, I'll try this thing. That sounds great, but I'm doing things that whatever. I will think, and I'm just not engaged the way it feels. I will think, do the opposite. And so, that can mean anything. That can mean just then now doing, just taking myself out of what's being just prescribed here.
Yeah.
That could mean, just starting to explore in a way that's not what I've been doing. And then once I've been doing that for a while, maybe that becomes a little bit like, so do the opposite. But reading this chapter today, I was thinking about like, man, this could really work for almost any part of it. Describing how it's not just doing the opposite. What you're really doing is finding a balance, right? You're like discovering this part of yourself, the thing that's rote, that you're not connected to, that's actually a big, important part of you. And when you go to the opposite end of whatever that is, whether that's something as minuscule as the language you're playing during a solo, or even how you structure your career or your life or the decisions you make, finding, like just considering the opposite end of the spectrum helps to find some balance.
Yeah, it's great. And then I think, Rick Rubin brings in the analogy in terms of that balance of the seesaw.
Yeah.
And I love thinking about things that are very simple. Obviously, a seesaw, like the visual. We have the visual. We also have, if you can remember, if you were as a kid played on a seesaw.
Yeah.
So important for kids to get out and play. I'm not talking about playing a seesaw video game.
No,
I'm talking
get out
about
there.
an actual
get on the
seesaw.
playground.
It's a little dangerous, but
yeah. No,
skin
it's
your
all
knees
right.
up. Yeah,
Fall off the seesaw a little bit.
But you actually learn how to feel that. And so it's like, how do you take, and in terms of balance, it's like if you're a seesaw, if you're, for your example, in terms of improvising, if kind of playing by rote, playing what's most comfortable, zoning out, but not in a flow state kind of a way. If that's the equivalent to like, a fat dude sitting on one end of the seesaw, right? It's like, okay, how do you do the opposite? Well, we want to get into balance, so it's not like let's get a fatter guy to sit on the other side in terms of our concept, and then boom.
By the way, I love this analogy.
Sorry.
Keep going.
Well,
Keep going. No,
I'm sorry, a more portly gentleman.
Wait, that's what you considered better?
I don't know. What am I
good.
saying?
Keep going.
You know what I'm saying? Where it's just like, the ideas are so, but it's like, how do you get that seesaw into balance? Like, it's never like, oh, we're going to measure this and do the exact opposite.
It's a feeling.
It's a feeling, right? And you remember that when you're like on that seesaw?
That's what balance is. Balance is a feeling. It's a physical feeling.
And it's, I love these things that explain, there's a science beneath it as well as like where the fulcrum is or whatever. Yeah. So, because remember, sometimes like we can feel things that are way above our pay grade, that are above our intellectual capacity to understand.
Yeah.
That's right. Not yet.
True.
And maybe never, but that doesn't mean you can't become a master. Because remember how if somebody was heavier than you, you'd have to you'd push back? Or
you could move the seesaw.
You'd have to move.
At least our old school dangerous 80s seesaw.
Exactly, yeah. So but I'm saying you'd have to scoot up further or back. That's all part of that balancing. So it's the same thing when we're in a solo. When we're practicing, when we're working on improvising, when we're adjusting our mind to like how we're going to need to be able to react to the moment when you're playing with others, right?
Yeah.
All these different variables. So if you understand those opposite actions that you would do on the seesaw to get into balance, and then you can play with it. And then the art is like, how do you do it without being like, I made it perfect, now I'm in balance. It's like, no, boom, boom. Like how do you pull and push and pull? I mean, what we listened to in the last episode with McCoy Tyner and Elvin Jones, what a balance, what a dance of opposites and back and forth and volleying of ideas, and a seesaw act that's so exhilarating to the listener.
Well, and that doesn't, that finding the balance, that doesn't mean that you just run away from what was pulling the seesaw down in the first place.
That's right.
Right? Actually going to the opposite can help you, and Rick Rubin talks about this, even if you don't use what's on the opposite, right? Like exploring like, okay, I'm a pianist that does this kind of improvised music. That's an identity that I have, right? That's something that a story that I tell myself. If I go to make something with that identity in mind, without exploring like, well, wait, what if I don't do this as a pianist who does this thing? What if I took this from, I maybe I pick up the guitar and I try to make this music and figure that out, or whatever that is, or I bring someone else in and I don't even make the music. I just help write it. Like that kind of thing, just exploring that idea, that could actually help you as a pianist who makes this sort of improvised music, right? You can explore different parts of yourself that actually help you on that main thing. You don't have to always go run towards the opposite, but just considering the opposite of big picture things, little picture things. We get a lot of questions around here about like, well, how do I know when I'm done practicing this particular concept? Like when should I move on? Right. That's a seesaw thing.
Yeah.
Right? That's like, when you feel disengaged from the material, when you're not present with it, go explore the opposite end of the seesaw.
Right.
Go listen to a bunch of music. If you've been practicing technique for a bunch, go listen to some Eric Dolphy.
Right.
You know what I mean? Go see if you've been listening to a bunch of Eric Dolphy, go listen to some Oscar Peterson.
Go listen to some seesaws.
No, but you know what I mean? Like just exploring those other ends of ourselves.
But it's so important, like you mentioned, about how do you know if you're done with it, where to move on from a technical practice or if you're feeling disengaged. That's why it's so important to be present and to understand, and part of that journey of practice, though, because if you're not, and this is a continuum, you have to constantly work on your concentration and your engagement.
Totally.
Because sometimes something becomes difficult, something becomes uncomfortable, something seems complex because you've created a story.
Yep.
Because it is hard for you.
Or someone's told you that's what you should be doing.
Right, right. There's, all these different things, or, my muscles started. Like, there's a lot of different things that can happen, but then you could use the excuse of, like, I'm not engaged anymore, I'm going to move on from this. Like, that, you have to understand, if you're physically hurting or you can't concentrate on something, that's a reason enough to leave it and come back to it. But I think we have to understand what those feelings are, and this is why I think getting in touch with something else than your main instrument, playing another instrument, athletics, walk. There's so many different things that we can think about these, sitting on a seesaw,
life,
right? Relationships, get a feel for these different things so that when you come back to the piano, you come back to your instrument, you come back to a solo, you'll kind of be able to, go through that meditative process of like, oh, okay, hold on a second. Yeah, I'm feeling discomfort, but is that because I'm disengaged, or maybe I'll embrace the discomfort a little bit because I'm actually engaged in this technical endeavor to get better.
Well, discomfort, it doesn't have to mean you're not engaged.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But there are false signals. It's like, how does it actually feel? I've been thinking about this with my running journey, and I went into the thing of like learning about becoming a better runner, trying to become a better runner, and I've starting to learn about that. But I'm so grateful for all it's brought to my piano and music making journey, and hopefully in sort of how I'm able to teach and talk about some of this stuff. But it's just like little things that are clearer with running, because it's such a kind of basic sport in a way. It's like everybody can do it that's able-bodied in terms of their having legs and that kind of, like, if you can, and so there's not like there's not a strategy until you get to the higher levels, I guess, or whatever. So we can bring back some of those elements to playing the piano. I think playing the piano, playing music, improvising, these different things, there's great things that we can take to this and take to other parts of our lives too. But sometimes it's analogous, sometimes it's not. But I think about like, there's certain things about running faster that if you can base it down, you can break it down to the seesaw thing of like, you can take a longer stride, but then you're going to be probably moving a little bit slower because it's going to take you longer for that slide. Or you can keep your stride the same, but move a little faster. The cadence is a little bit quicker. So it's like all the end result you're looking for is speed, but in actuality, what you're looking for is like the journey. Right. Like where do I get that balance between cadence and stride length that I can sustain it for the longest possible period, maybe not happily, but without collapsing. It's like you start to get a feel for some of those things. And once I realized that, I was like, wow, well, how do I do that within a solo? It's like, because being creative versus playing by rote, that's one balance that we're doing. Being able to play with our left hand versus the right. Left and right are opposite, right? But we have to bring them together. Like, how do we balance those things?
That's a perfect example. So our dear friend Jeffrey Keyser, friend of the show, open studio artist.
Yeah.
Well known for being a really creative pianist, especially with how he approaches things. And he talks about this all the time, about trying different things in your improvisation practice.
Yeah.
And so, the title of this episode, Peter, is The Art of Balance, Breaking the Rules. And one of the things you can do is identify, okay, what are the rules I'm imposing on my running or my playing right now?
Yes.
Because we all are doing it. It's natural. There's nothing wrong with it. Like
Yeah.
there might be a rule, okay, well, I'm taking a solo, right hand is going to do the solo.
Right. Left-hand accompanies right-hand solos.
An arbitrary rule that you're putting on yourself because you've heard it and someone told you, but you can totally explore starting your solo out with your left hand or ending your solo with your left hand. There's no rules that aren't there to be broken.
Yes.
And breaking those rules and exploring that other side, that's the
art.
That's the art of the balance, is identifying the rule and then exploring with breaking some of those rules and just poking around in what's there in that little mess,
Such a great thing specifically, I think, this concept for practicing improvise. And you said, I think with Keezer, you said, a great practicing improvise. Like, I don't think somebody like that is never thinking about, let me practice this and I'm going to practice. It's all with the end result of becoming a better improviser.
You're practicing the journey.
You're right.
Yeah.
But like to have this thing of like breaking rules and exploring that is so great for the practice part in specific because it enables you to have a better chance of continuing that mentality and that mindset when you get into actually improvising. But it also reinvigorates or can reinvigorate and kind of reignite that fire for your practice because it becomes like fun. You're exploring these things. It's not just like, oh, I got to check all these different boxes. You're still going to end up checking boxes, but you don't necessarily know as you're going in how you're going to do it. When you start talking about balance and opposites and doing what some would say is wrong or is right, like that just really frees you up for the journey to be fun. It's also more times than not, I think, going to put you in a position to make some really good progress also.
Totally.
Which, as we know, is never linear anyway. Because we know it, there's no way to do it exactly like this. You might as well have fun as you're going
and
up and down.
Don't forget, as you break the rule, that means that you also are identifying that there's a rule.
Yeah.
So you are learning about what you do.
Yeah.
Even as you try to break through that stuff, you're like, well, if I'm breaking something, what is it? What is I'm breaking?
Right.
And that kind of helps you to see where you are and what you're working on.
And it can be such a cool thing. Like the rules then become more like, we're not suggesting throw all the rules out and just play random, but it's like the rules can become more like guardrails.
Yeah.
Like for your practice, we talk about restrictive practice and stuff, but that can be a shifting thing.
Yeah.
The restriction that we put on our practice, we can turn that upside down. We can do the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, okay, we're going to play with only half notes. We talk about this. And then get a little more complicated with your writing.
It's a little rule that you're putting on yourself, right? I'm going to do a little rule here in my practice.
Right. So what would the opposite of that be?
Is to not do steady half notes.
No half notes.
No
right.
half notes.
Okay, this is already hard for me.
Yeah, but that's a rule. Can I do it without doing any half notes?
Like you're going to anticipate.
Right.
So it's guardrails still, but
now
it's
that's
not
a new
as much
rule.
of a rule. Yeah.
No half notes. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's really, it's endless. But this is what being a person is
right.
Like exploring these boundaries.
And I think when people talk about like, things, little aphorisms that can seem trite and silly, there's a lot of like human yearning within that. I don't want to live my life in a box. I don't want the man to hold me down. I don't want to just do what society says. Like this is about breaking rules, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not about breaking laws and being an idiot or like just destroying society. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about like.
Glad you clarified that.
Yeah, sorry. Wait, was anyone thinking that? Little disclaimer. No, but I mean, you would think about like when people say they don't want to live life in a box. What I get out of that is like they want to have an artistic flair. They want to have a creativity to things that they do, which I think is great because why should we? I mean, it's easier for us as artists, or as they say in France, artistes, to live creatively, but everybody can do that. That's like the fun of this. And sometimes we look at certain cultures or societies, and a lot of times it's a stereotype, but we're like, the Italians, they live life with such a flair, such a joie de vivre, or I guess that'd be more French or anything. But it's like, part of that is like, yeah, you could sit on a street in any neighborhood in Milan having espresso and watching people walk by, and a lot of them are going to be more artfully dressed with a little bit of a flair, but they kind of broke some rules and things. I mean, think about that in fashion. You know, like you break a rule, you do something opposite, you try to balance something out, you try not to balance it. Just trying is living outside of the box.
Hey, listen. People said that no one would listen to a podcast from two idiot pianists talking about their favorite music.
Is anyone still listening?
Probably
Hello.
not. Probably not. But we don't care about those rules. We're breaking the rules.
Wait, hold on. This is how we're going to do it.
Okay.
Wake up. See, that's the thing. If anybody's still, you know how you fall asleep and you're
Yeah.
listening to the podcast? That's the only time you get to the end.
Well, and let's remind people here, if you're on YouTube,
We got a rule for them, don't we?
we got a rule, and
It's not, now, this is not a rule. This is a law.
it's an agreement.
It's an agreement.
It's an agreement.
It's a legal doctrine.
It's a gentleman and ladies agreement.
Gentlemen and ladies agreement, and it's actually required.
It is required.
So it's a mandatory agreement.
So the agreement is we make this show.
yes,
Whatever.
artfully.
I mean, show is in a couple of quotation marks. So take that for what it
It's
is.
a well-balanced, well-oiled machine.
Well, and then you, our dear listener, especially if you're on YouTube, you'll hear it YouTube channel.
It doesn't matter where they are.
Doesn't matter where they are.
Doesn't matter
Yeah,
where they
no,
are.
you're right. That's
Yeah.
my own. I'm putting my
Get it
own
balanced,
rules on
buddy.
this. I need to break through my own rules on this. Wherever you are,
Yeah.
you need to like, subscribe, leave a comment.
Right. And actually just go to YouTube. It doesn't matter if you're not watching it there.
Okay.
Just go to YouTube and search, because
I don't
that's
even
an
know the
easy
rules.
place to do it.
I got to learn the rules.
You got to like and subscribe the channel.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the agreement. Thank you for making it this far and adhering to the agreement.
Well, people have been commenting. I don't know if you noticed, but a lot of people have been commenting. Agreement adhered to.
That's right.
And we love those comments.
And after we've delivered another brilliant episode, all I can say is agreement adhered to for providing it. And
You'll hear it.